All right, it's the top of the hour. Let's go ahead and get started. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to MAXDAYS 2023, day 2. In this session, we are going to look at how to code, retrieve, export, and report with MAXQDA. We're going through the whole thing today. This is built as more of a starter session, so we're leaning into kind of the basics here, and we're looking at things on the functional side. But even if you have some time in with the software, I think that you will find some tips and tricks here that you can add to your MAXQDA skill set. At least that's the idea. My name is Joel Drevlo. I am a MAXQDA Cooperation Partner and Certified Trainer based out of Boston, Massachusetts, USA. So let's jump in. All right, a little vignette to get us going. One of the very first things I did with MAXQDA way back when I was starting to use the software was to code some federal activities reports that had been created by some of our sister organizations that were doing similar work to what we were. So my team had been tasked with creating our organization's federal report that year, and we wanted to see how our colleagues were writing up their report. It wasn't terribly exciting work, but it was work that needed to be done so we could build a plan to write a quality report of our own. So basically the process, we tracked down some published reports, we coded them, and it was really a great task for me because it allowed me to just focus on using MAXQDA. How to highlight a segment, how to add an actual code, how to work with PDFs and texts, how to annotate or leave some notes, move between documents in a project. So all of these sort of functional things that are kind of in the background that as you get more comfortable with, kind of takes less and less of your processing power, right? You're able to focus more on doing the actual analysis, and the functional pieces sort of fall into place. So once I'd coded this data, we were able to use activation logic to grab reports from specific institutions. We were writing about all kinds of diverse things. So some had a great knack for writing about certain topics. So we were able to identify certain reports. We were able to grab certain sections of reports. So if we were wanting to review a certain piece that we were writing. So now instead of flipping through literally hundreds of pages in a federal report, we were able to activate specific documents and codes and grab exactly what we were interested in. So this is kind of a snapshot of what we're trying to get at today. So you've likely got a lot of data in your project, or you will if you're still building your project, and you really can't have it all in your head at once. I wish that would be the case, but it's just not. So today we're going to look at some kind of straightforward techniques to get you thinking about coding, retrieval, the export process, and we want you to export some of that to your projects. All right, so where do we start today? When we look at coding, there's a lot of different angles you can go at with coding. There are literally hundreds of articles and texts that are dedicated to the topic of creating code. I mean, it is the fundamental piece of sort of qualitative data analysis. And while I would really love to dive into this, it's not really possible in the scope of a 30-minute session. So for our time today, we're going to stick more again to the functional side of things, how to actually do this work in MAXQDA. But keep those thoughts about what you need to get out of your code system in mind as we go through these options. Hopefully, some of this will click. You'll see certain things that will work well for your applications. And also, I'm hoping when we hold time at the end for questions that we can get into some of that conversation if you do have questions about it. All right, so as we build out our code, one of the things that we want to consider is what type of data that you are working with. So texts and transcripts are pretty straightforward. You're working with long form data, which you'll read closely. You'll assign your codes. Survey data, Twitter data, YouTube comments, these will work a little bit differently because instead of working with less long documents, you're working with more short documents, right? So you're working with small chunks of data. And you'll actually even get to use different tools as you get into this process. And we'll look at some of those as we get through the session today. But I want to give you just an idea of what I mean by this. So let me open up a few documents. I am working in the example project here, the English Work-Life Balance. If you want to try and follow along, you're more than welcome to do that. So if we take a look at an interview transcript, for example, this is a transcript of Salim, you can see that we've got a pretty long document that sort of traces the course of the interview. Um, Whereas if we work with some survey data, if I open up some of that, if I open up my folder for survey data, you'll see that I have many, many documents. Whereas in my interviews, I only have 5. In my surveys, I have, in this case, 55 respondents, which is on the small side. I mean, typically you could have thousands of these. And if we open up one of these documents, we see that they're quite short, they're quite brief. Um, and obviously, this is just the nature of the data, right? These are supposed to be short responses. I'm not going to go into all the details of the specific coding for survey stuff. I believe there was sessions that were focused explicitly on that, so you can certainly check those out. Categorizing survey data. We might get a chance to take a look at the tool quickly, but just to give you a sense of how this process will work. Obviously, you could do this work in your document browser like you would an interview or some kind of other document, but it's quite tedious to click through hundreds and hundreds of these and to remember where you're at. So there's specific tools that are built for that process. Same is going to be for Twitter data. If we go to our Analyze Tweets option and we sort of take a look at what some of this stuff looks like, you're going to see that we get a new window that actually prompts us into doing our work in a table. This just sort of works better for the way that the data is set up, right? Many, many documents that have short amounts of texts or tweets in this case, or hashtags and those kinds of things. The survey data, the categorized survey data is going to look very similar to what you're seeing here in terms of its functionality. It's laid out in a table format and allows you to do this work. And those are really helpful tools. We'll look at that a little bit later on in the session here today. So as we get into this, let me go back to my slides here. I want to show some of these coding tools, and what we're going to look at specifically are tools that are built into your document browser. And so that's the window that you're seeing currently right here. We've got our document system, document browser, code system, and retrieve segments window if I have it open, just to make sure that you're familiar with the terms. Sometimes the specific terminology, if you're going from one software to another, can be a little bit confusing. So let's take a look at some of these specific tools, and we're going to be looking at these in the context of a interview transcript. So we'll be looking at, we'll just take a look at one of these interviews from Berlin. And some of this work in the example project, there's already quite a bit of coding that's taken place here. So we can actually see sort of the end product of a lot of this, which is helpful for us. Anytime we have codes, obviously they're going to be displayed here in your coding bar. Note that you do have some specific options to display here. So you can customize this. One thing that's really helpful as you get into the later stages of your project is to take advantage of these color options to turn specific, the view of specific codes on and off. If you're working with, hundreds of codes, it can get really messy. And especially if you're working on a smaller screen, like on a laptop or a smaller monitor. So you'll want to take advantage of that to use the specific codes that you want to see, right? Always want to have that opportunity to sort of filter our workspace, right? So we're seeing just what we're interested in to remove any of that extraneous sort of data or information that's not relevant. So as we get going with this, you can see our coding stripes here. If I turn on my sidebar, I can see any annotations I've made, any paraphrases. Again, with a right-click option, I can select the specific things that I'm seeing. So you get a sense of what the end product is. As far as functionally generating a code, it's a pretty straightforward process. So let's take an example of that here. So we have some codes that have been created already. Friends and family, childcare, typical workday. And we can see that here in this particular paragraph. So to give you just a quick example of how we might create a code, I see as Salim is talking about their typical workday, they mention this concept of breakfast. So I might want to compare that across my different interviews. So how did they talk about this? Do they eat different meals? Do they not eat breakfast? Maybe it's not terribly interesting, but it's a pretty simple example. So what we can do here is we can highlight this portion of text. So let's see here. We'll start right at the beginning of the sentence, and we'll just go down. We'll go down to the end of this sentence. Now, this is completely customizable. You can code the entire paragraph. You can code a sentence, you can code a word if you want to. I'm going to talk about some of those considerations in a second, but first let's actually just generate a code here. So with this text highlighted, I want to create a new code. So breakfast does not exist yet over here in my code system. And I want to add this actually as a subcode to my typical workday. So I'm gonna look at it as a concept of that. So I'm gonna right click here. Right clicking is something that you'll use a lot in MAXQDA in terms of finding specific context menus. It's a great way to try and find features if you don't know exactly where they're located. You can usually kind of point yourself in the right direction and right click to get what you're after. So in this case, I'm going to create a new code here. So with new code, it's going to bring up a menu that's going to allow me to specify some options for this code. So in this case, I'm just going to call this breakfast. Pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about naming conventions a little bit as you do some of your coding, as we get to sort of some best practices for developing codes. Note that you can change the colors on these. Again, this is going to be helpful for you. If you have an extensive code system, you can use colors as a way to activate specific codes. So you can use it purely as an organizational piece, or you can layer that in with some kind of sort of analysis that the code is representative of something, or it adheres to a certain category. And that will allow you to grab a whole bunch of stuff in your code system without having to click 20, 30 times. We'll go ahead and let's set turquoise. That's a good color. The code memo is going to be, and basically is your definition. If you have any examples, and then a statement sort of when to apply this code and when not to apply this code. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The comment is what you see over here in the sidebar. So this is an annotation of the actual code itself. So these are usually any kind of keywords or any specific annotations. And oftentimes what I try to do in my own practice is to use complete sentences. Keywords are nice. I do like to include those from time to time. It can help you build out subcodes and those kinds of things, but it lacks a little bit of the context. So when you come back to this, or if you share this with a teammate or an advisor or someone else like that, it's missing pieces. And so you want to try and provide as much complete context as you can. All right, so we're going to click OK, and you'll see what happens. I have a new code here for breakfast. Breakfast appears at the top of my code system with one coded segment, and it also has a memo attached, right? Now, I said earlier I wanted to include this as a subcode of my typical workday. So simply, I'm just going to drag it down here into my typical workday, and you'll see that now it's indented, indicating it is a subcode of that code. You'll note that you can have hierarchies here, right? So I have work-life balance as my top level code or my parent code. All of these are children codes, and I have subcodes within subcodes. So you can get quite complex with how you organize these things. It's something you want to experiment with as you go through building out your coding system. There's lots of ways to approach this. I think a hierarchical fashion is very, very common in sort of the examples and the work that I've seen folks do. I think it's just kind of a logical way to do things. But note that you can, with activation, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you can grab things from different codes. So it doesn't have to be things from purely one category that you look at. You can sort of look at a few of them sort of in conjunction. Let's talk about some of the other coding tools that are available to you through the document browser. That was a basic creating a new code. There, of course, is the option to create in vivo codes. In vivo codes, meaning using actually a portion of the text as the name of the code. So we might look at this particular piece here. Unpredictable might be an aspect. If we categorize this, note that it brings in the word, and that happened kind of fast. So let me go ahead, undo that, and show you that again. So if we highlight the particular word of interest here, we specify it with an in vivo code, and it will pull in that particular piece of text as the name of the code. So that can be kind of advantageous if you have very explicit language that is getting at whatever theme or concept that you are trying to code. Another one that can be helpful sort of in the early stages of your project is to use these options at the top of your document browser. the highlighting options. So if I were to turn on, let's do green, I like green, we can highlight particular pieces of text and assign them this green highlight color. What that allows us to do is to sort of, we can see this one's actually already taken as good quotes here. Our highlighter has been called to good quotes. So let's use a different color here. Let's see, we'll highlight this one in magenta. And so this has just the simple color name as it. And so of course you can rename these if these decide, if you're looking for things and you find that you're using a highlighter code in a consistent fashion, you can then rename this with the actual code name that's applied. So this can be a nice piece if you don't have specific code names that you want to generate yet, but you want to highlight specific things that you're seeing throughout your text. The last option I'll show here is, well, actually, I'll show the emoticode as well. So you can actually code things with specific emoticons if you have specific sentiments, happy, neutral, sad. You can use that as a representation of things. One thing that you can also use is this open coding mode. And if you're taking more of a grounded theory approach, this can be helpful because you can generate many codes at the outset of your process. You can then condense those codes. There's other trainers. I think great presentation happened earlier today on on grounded theory and MAXQDA, and I'm sure more of this was covered in detail. But to give you a sense of how that works, this is a mode, meaning you turn it on and off. So when the open coding mode is on, anytime I highlight a piece of text and let go, it will give me the opportunity to create a new code. When I'm done with this process, I simply turn it off and my highlighter functions as normal. So it saves you some clicks, right? Instead of having to right click and add a new code every time, you can simply release your cursor and you have the option to create a new code pop up automatically for you. So that can be a really helpful piece. So let's talk about some practices that you can incorporate as you generate new code. So one thing that we saw when we created this breakfast code, let's open up our memo. The first thing would be to have sort of just clear and direct names. So the sort of more direct we are with those names, the easier it is for multiple coders to apply those things. So if you're working in teams, or you're going to be doing some kind of intercoder reliability check, sort of the more straightforward your code names are, the less interpretation needs to happen on your end, right? It's easier to apply those. Now, over time, through different stages, as you get more to the sort of synthesis phase, you can draw out a little bit of that complexity. But when you're actually applying the code, it's a little bit simpler if you have sort of brief, direct and concise names. We saw the idea with code memos. I think as far as memos, this is really one of the great uses of memos in MAXQDA is to define your code system. So providing clear definitions, providing clear examples. One feature I really like that's built into memos is the timestamp feature. So I can include a reference to when did I have this insight or when did I make this revision to my code system. So you can really track things back in stages of your analysis. What session was that? Who was I coding with that day? That can be a really nice piece to sort of track that development of the actual code. We saw the work with colors. I'm going to show you how you leverage colors and activation in your code system in a little bit. I really like this aspect too. When to apply this code, and especially when not to apply this code. From my experience working in teams, this has always been a really fruitful point of discussion. So those instances when those sort of border cases, those are great places to discuss sort of how you build up your code system and how you apply it as a team, sort of looking at that coder agreement. We saw as well this idea of code comments. So we have one that's already listed here. You can do this in a couple of ways. You can create the code comments immediately if you generate a new code. When you code a segment, you'll also notice we have the solid bubbles here and the empty ones. You can double click on the actual code, the code stripe over here. So for example, flexibility. I can double click, it'll open up a code comment and I can provide my annotations here. What's really nice about code comments is they are attached at the level of the coded segment. So anywhere you export this, so if you make a any kind of, if you're looking at like a interactive quote matrix where you have columns of text separated by variables, you can see these comments alongside. So you get the actual data, but you get the analysis as well. So code comments are a really valuable tool to be using, as it just gives you another layer of analysis that you can look at alongside the data. Let's see, let's take a look. Let's switch gears here. Let's switch over to the retrieval aspect or the activation aspect of MAXQDA. So this is really the key logic, right? Turning things on and off, activating, selecting, however works to conceptualize this in your head. Essentially what you're doing is selecting or like I said, turning on certain stuff. So if I come up here to my interviews, for example, I've got 5 interviews here in Berlin. I can activate these and you'll see that my icon changes from a gray bubble to a red arrow. These texts also change red. In my dashboard, I have the 5 activated documents as well. Same goes for the codes. So if I come down to my code system and I activate my work-life balance codes, I see that I have 9 codes activated. These change to red. So what this allows us to do, obviously, is to grab certain pieces of data. This is all going to appear then in our retrieve segments window, right? So again, it shows in my dashboard here, I have 62 coded segments. So from these 5 documents and from this parent code here, work-life balance, I get these 62 coded segments. Now, what you can do once you have this is you can export this, you can do further analysis on this, you can conduct word clouds from this, you can print these. So this is really kind of how you activate or how you look at certain pieces of your project. So if you're building a very extensive project file with lots and lots of data, lots and lots of documents, this is going to be a really, really valuable feature for you. And it's one that you'll definitely want to get the hang of before you start jumping into creating, visualizations and reports and things like that. There are some additional ways to activate those. So this is going to be the most straightforward. If you know exactly what you want, you can activate those documents. If you know exactly which codes you want, you can just click and activate those. It gets a little bit more complicated when you don't know the exact document that you're looking for. You don't have the exact specified document, but you might know some criteria. Let's say I know a variable value that it has, or I know a color. So there are ways to grab those specific documents. So let's take a look at that. One little tip for you here, there's an option in your code system to reset activations and in your document system to reset activations. I'm compulsive with this because I've been burned before where I had things activated that I did not intend to have activated and it screwed something up down the line. So reset all the time. Make sure you grab exactly what you're looking for. So let's take a look at those right-click options. If I come up to my document system, I can right-click here at the top level, and I have an option to activate documents by variables. If I come to the More option, I also see some others to activate by color, activate by random. This can be kind of nice if you're doing a little bit of exploration in some new data, especially like survey data or something like that. If you're working with focus groups, you can use specific variables to your focus groups. You can also invert. So if you want everything except for a couple codes, you can activate those first and then get the inverse. That can be kind of handy sometimes when you're doing organization, moving stuff around in your project file. But let's take a look at how this activate documents by variables works. So if I click here, I can grab specific variable criteria. In this case, let's go ahead and take employment, and we'll set the variable status to student. So I can see that now from my entire data set, I've got 8 documents that meet this criteria where their employment is student. I can choose to activate this. I can also choose to create a new set, right? So I can save this for analysis. Sets are a really nice piece. You can think of this as sort of like a bookmark, right? You're keeping this placeholder here. If I were to delete this set, or remove in this case, it doesn't affect anything up here in my document system. It just removes it from my set. So you can safely experiment with sets, if they turn out to not be useful for you, you can remove them from your project file with little to no consequence. Let's take a quick look here at how this the export features work. You're going to leverage this a lot with the actual activation piece. So you're going to want to select, obviously, certain pieces of data, either specific documents or specific documents and codes before you export. So for this, you're going to probably be using your retrieve segments window. Let's say I wanted to grab from my interviews, I wanted to grab all of their sentiments on education and friends and family. And I want to share that with a colleague who does not have MAXQDA, but I would like them to read some of the things that I've coded and to get their thoughts. I have all of these segments now in my retrieve segments window, and I can export these. So there's a couple ways I can do this. I can send it out as an Excel table in which we can actually just take a look at this so you can get a sense of what it looks like. So in this case, everything's going to be broken up into columns. I have my specific comments, document groups, document names. My segments will appear right here. So this is one way to look at it. Note that you get a lot of extra sort of data with this, some metadata from MAXQDA that's generated, and also if you have weight scores and things like that assigned, you can include that as well. If you want to be more particular about this, you can use the export option here, and you can select the particular pieces that you want. So if you want to make a more refined view for your colleague where they're not inundated with like 30 columns in an Excel spreadsheet, you can grab just the particular stuff that's relevant. You can also export this, of course, as a Word document, or you can print it directly if you want to do that. So that would be if you wanted to grab particular segments. Now, what if you wanted an entire document? The option there would be to go over to your document system. I can right-click here on Mateo's document, and I can export. There's a couple of ways that you can do this. If you want to include these coding stripes, PDF is going to be your best bet. You can display coded segments here. You can also include the memos. So this is kind of a nice thing if you want to actually include some of that coding work that you've done. There is also the options to export this specifically as a text document, HTML, or again as a spreadsheet. So you have lots of options here. If you want more of a global option, let's say you want to export a whole bunch of stuff out of your project file, you can come up to the reports tab and there's an option here to export. So I can send out my whole document system, my whole code system, specific documents, retrieve segments. So I have many more options that are available to me here. So if you've been using MAXQDA for a while, you probably are familiar with the fact that there's a lot of ways to do the same function. So you can use your ribbon and select an option. You can right click. You can find the icon in the window. No way is really better than another. It's just your particular workflow. So try and find one that works best for you and integrate that into the way that you do your work. Let's talk a little bit about reports. These are pretty straightforward, really. You'll be using these most likely when you get to either sort of a stopping point in your analysis when you want to bring in some feedback, or towards the end of things when you're trying to actually export full pieces of information. So let's take a look at some of these options. So Smart Publisher here, again in your reports option in the ribbon. This will allow you to select particular pieces from your project file. Note these options. You'll see these a lot when you generate visualizations and things like this, only for activated documents. So you'll want to set this up prior. Now, in some cases, you can go back and activate and refresh. This, unfortunately, is not one of those windows. So I would need to, if I wanted to change that, I would need to cancel out of this and say I wanted to include Hamburg as well. Now I have 10 documents. This would allow me to select a particular sort of piece of code. The easiest here is just going to be to activate. So let's go ahead and activate that. Select my activated codes, and you see I get these options. This will allow you as well to specify some specific things on your title page. So you can include any kind of this information, headers and footers as well. What this does is it generates a nice sort of collated Word document for you. You'll get this option a lot with reports. And basically what this means is Microsoft Word is going to create a table of contents that's linked to all of your data. So don't freak out. This isn't some kind of error or issue. It's just telling you to allow that option Here it is. It contains fields that refer to others. Again, we're hyperlinking our text. And so what we get included here, a reference to the specific documents that I've included, right? The ones I've activated, the 10 documents I've activated. And then each one of the codes in sequence with the particular coded segment attached to it, and then any metadata that I've brought along. So this can be a nice piece. Again, if you're working with folks that don't have MAXQDA, that don't want to mess with MAXQDA Reader, you can just give them the specific information that's relevant for them. Let's take a look at a couple other of these report options, and then I'll stop for questions because I do want to look at that. Your code book is pretty straightforward. This is going to export your code system, and what this will include is the names and memos. So again, if you wanted to pass this off to someone else, or if you wanted to include this sort of in a briefing for individuals, if you were going to be assigning code work to them so that they could have a nice straightforward document to read, that would be a great application there. One that I think is kind of interesting is this document profiles option. And what this is going to do is export a spreadsheet. Let's see where it popped up on my computer here. Let's try that again, see if I can specify. Put it on my desktop. So what this actually creates is kind of a nice broad comparison of all of the different aspects of our documents, so we can kind of get a comparison. So we can look at the number of codes that were assigned. We can look at specific memos that are included, names, document groups. So you can get kind of a nice comparison of what's going on sort of at a high level in the documents that you have in your project file. I think that kind of takes us through kind of the basics in terms of reports. Those are just some great things to play around with. One I didn't get enough time to get to is in the analysis, the questions, themes, and theories workspace is another one that is, what I like about this is you can really be very fine-grained with this. So if I just open this up and to give you an example, you can specify a specific subject and a specific research question. So the concept's kind of the same, I guess, in terms of you're grabbing those elements that are relevant to a certain criteria. But what QTT allows you to do is to also record insights. So you can export the specific data or the specific elements from your project that you're interested in, but you can also attach any insights that you have as a researcher. So this is a really great piece at a whole bunch of stages early on to pass to colleagues to get insights, or advisors if you're writing a master's thesis or dissertation, or at the end stages to get you a nice polished product. It looks very similar to what we saw earlier with the which was that the Smart Publisher, where it's nice and collated. You have a hyperlinked option of table and contents and stuff like that. So that can be a really nice feature to utilize as well. Let me jump into some of these questions now. I'm going to head over to the Q&A tab. Let's see. When I export retrieve segments into Word or use Smart Publisher to create reports, using the same fonts as the original document, this wide range of font sizes is best suited to Word. Is there a way to get MAXQDA to apply standardized, consistent font and paragraph alignments to exported segments? Yes, I believe that there is. I don't know if you can specify that directly in Smart Publisher or not, if you can change those. You can't change it directly from here. I know that there is kind of I've seen this in trainings when I went through the certified training protocol course. There is a way to specify that in some of the program files, I believe, where you can change these things. That's probably a little bit more detail to go into here in this session. I would probably screw that up on the fly. I would reach out to our functional support, and we could probably walk you through that course. Sort of how you can change some of those things. That's a great question, though. Can you export the document showing the coding stripes and codes attached to the segments in the document? Yes, you can. So the way that you would do that, there's a couple of ways you can do it. So for example, in this interview transcript, if I right-click on Mateo's interview and I choose the export document option, the only way you'll be able to export that document with the coding stripes is to choose this PDF document option. You display the coded segments. when I save this file, let's see, it's on my desktop now, and I open it up in my preview. I'm on a Mac today. You'll see that I have all of my coding stripes here that are assigned to my text. So that would be one way to do it. You can also use this print option here, and you could print it directly to paper if you want to go to paper. You can also, through here, you can specify this option, and you can save as a PDF if you wanted to do that here. That's just kind of another way to do it. A little less straightforward. I think the easiest option is just this export document option. PDF, make sure that you select the coded segments. Note that you can also change the size of that column if you want to make your document a little bit more readable. You can adjust this as well. I should also note that it is dependent on what you have visible here. So if my coding system is messy and I want to include just one code, when I go to export now, it will only include that single code. So if I pull this over again, see my magenta. Oh, I don't know why my magenta code didn't pop up here. But it will only show this particular code, and it's probably because this is a highlight and not an actual code. But you can specify what you want to see. So if you have a particular piece that you want to export to look at later. Let's see, is it necessary to develop a code book prior to the start of the process? That's a great question. In short, no. So there's different approaches you can take. If you're taking sort of a data-driven approach where you are generating your code from the data as you read it, then you would be creating it as you go. So that's precisely what things like the open coding mode and the highlighter and stuff like that are for. You can generate that code as you actually read through the text. You can also do more of a deductive approach where you create a code system in advance. This can be very refined if you're working off of some kind of established sort of theory or sort of a framework that's already been developed by another researcher. You can apply that, and that's usually a pretty just straightforward application. This is well defined. This is sort of well experimented. You know how to apply this to your data. Or you can do kind of a hybrid where you have an idea, right? You have an idea of what to expect, and you have a rough framework. My only advice would just be to be flexible because chances are things will change as you go, and just don't fight that. Let it work a little bit and let those codes evolve as you go. How can I add variables such as ages? Are they from codes? So that was actually one thing I didn't show you in the code system was the same opportunities to right click and to activate codes by variables, color. And so you can actually specify certain criteria to grab codes throughout your code system. Variables can be added up here. So you have in your list of document variables, you would first add a new variable. So we'll just call this dummy vars. It's a text variable, so I have a new row added. Now I come over to my data editor, and I have a new column in my data editor for dummy vars where I can include text, text or numbers, whatever it may be. And so this is on the level of the document. So it would activate a document if you specified certain criteria. You could turn on turn on a document that way. You can also import document variables via an Excel spreadsheet. So the easiest way to do that is to go to your data editor, to export. So you could open this as an Excel table. It's probably best practice to remove these pieces after document name. You need document group and document name. That's what it's going to use to attach. And then you can append your variable values there. So if you did a focus group and you have a pre-survey screener, you could include that data there. It would just match to the focus group speaker name in that case. So that's an easy way if you already have it. Otherwise, if you're working with less documents, like you're doing long form interviews, you can easily just use the data editor to enter that data manually. Does demonstrate how to create variables. I think we saw that real quickly. If you are working on a review article, can you create an abstract straight from MAXQDA, maybe using Smart Publisher? I think you might be better off using QTT for that, to be honest. Smart Publisher really is going to grab primarily just data from your project. So it's going to grab those coded segments and things like that. So I guess if you were using that data directly, you could use it in that context. QTT is going to give you more flexibility in terms of the insights that you can add. But I'm not sure exactly what that, how that output would align with what it is you're looking for in that case. Is there a way for me to export a code system that I created and send it to a colleague in MAXQDA file? Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Jane. Thank you for asking that. So when you have your, if you come to your codes, the codes tab, there's an option here to import code system, export code system. And there's a specific one, MAXQDA code system. This will create a, if your colleague is also on MAXQDA, this creates a file particular to MAXQDA that they can open, and it will generate that code system in their project. So it'll populate for them. Note that it won't obviously include the specific coded segments, but it will have the codes and the memos and colors and all those things. So exactly how you've arranged it. Let's say I got time for one last question here. When I upload Excel files, it includes question text from line 1 spreadsheets as codes. So if it gets coded, I add my own coding. How can I make it so my codes are activated? Yeah, so when you're uploading Excel files, so if you're doing like survey data, for example, it will auto code the text, and that's by design. One thing that is helpful in terms of organization, you can see it in the example project. We have the auto coded questions gathered under a single response. So when you go to do analysis, categorize survey data, you can grab everything that's listed here. And now I get all of the open-ended responses. So this is one way to keep those, and I don't have my documents activated, so it's not going to show any data. But you can now cycle through these particular things. You can, of course, turn those off if you don't want to see them. If you're going through your document browser, you can turn those particular colors off as well to include so that you don't have those things in the text. I guess we still have time, don't we? Is it 11:45? Yeah, it's 11:45. All right. Let's see. How do you link PDFs as external files? That should happen automatically. So in your settings option, so external files. So again, MAXQDA is database software, right? So most data lives in your project file. In sort of the point to keep project files small so that when you need to share them and also just to make them quicker to work with, we have this idea called external files where it's sort of linked. You can specify that in your settings option here. Here's the folder where you can specify where those external documents are stored. PDF and image documents here, you can also specify the size. So 5 megabytes, anything over 5 megabytes is automatically going to get kicked to my external folder. So I can change this depending on where I want to keep that file. If it's making my project file quite large, I can keep those in an external file. It just keeps that file size down if I need to share it, or when I'm creating backups, so that I've worked with people when they're writing dissertations and they're very meticulous about backups for good reason, and they quickly run out of cloud storage or something because they have so many backups of their project files. Let's see if I missed any of these in the code here. I think I got most of them. Lots of questions on variables. I'll quick look into the chat. I see wondering if I'm working with an extended survey data, multiple code, best feature important frame my project. That's a good question. The project management is a big piece. You might actually, I'm doing a session in about 15 minutes on teamwork. You might want to check that out. I'll be talking about some of those specific considerations about like project management. How do you manage a project among a bunch of coders? So I would check that out. I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. But these are great questions. So I think I'm going to stop here for today. I want to keep everybody on time and give you chance to stretch your legs or network before the next session. Thank you for attending today, and thank you for all these great questions. It's so fun to try and answer all these on the fly. It kind of gets you up and going as you're doing this. So again, appreciate it, and I'll hopefully see some of you in a few minutes in the next session. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of Max Days.